Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to a new year 2022. I can't believe it. Hello and welcome back after a very small, short festive break, Sue. It's lovely to see you again. And as ever, every week I'm kind of just taken aback because you always seem to come up with even more amazing information. And clearly our discussions yesterday and today show that this is going to be an incredibly interesting and informative program. So tell us, what are we going to be learning about today?
Okay, leaping right in there. So I have been assigned in my role for the M word to do some research, and a lot of the research is current stuff, using the internet, accessing books, etc., people that are autistic advocates. But a chunk of this research is using journals that you have very kindly sent to me. So I actually have the journals with me, and I can pour through them and highlight and try and absorb these journals, because it's no mean feat. They are child psychology and psychiatry journals dating back to 2001. So 20 years worth of journals. And I thought for today's discussion, I would focus on one of the papers in one of these early journals, a 2001 journal called Reading the Mind in the Eyes. And this was a paper that interested me from the off when I was just flicking through the journal one day and thought, oh, this looks strangely curious, because I've never heard of that expression, reading the mind in the eyes. And so this was designed and performed by Simon Baron-Cohen, which is a name possibly familiar to a lot of people listening today. And he is related to the famous comedian Sacha Baron Cohen, and I often muddle up his name, so forgive me if I do again. But he is much more serious. He's an academic at the University of Cambridge, and he was recently on the telly programme about the McGuinness's autism diagnosis, Christine McGuinness. But anyway, I detract. So years ago, back in 1989, I think he started this study into what he called mentalizing, or theory of mind, it's also known as. And he devised a study, and it was just a small study, choosing people with autism, and then it was called high functioning autism. So those autistic people that could actually express themselves, and he devised this test using, and I'll show you, I'll hold up the book. Oh, that way.
No, that way, yep.
A test whereby people were shown little clips of photographs, black and white photographs, just of a person's eyes. And there was a mixture of male and female and different expressions, and corresponding words were given. And they had to choose, the people doing the study had to choose which was the relevant emotion or thought.
Okay.
And of course, the realization doing this study was that autistic people can have difficulty understanding what somebody else is feeling or thinking. Hence the reading of the mind in the eyes for this, because, the eyes, the window of the soul, they're supposed to show all. But actually, I think, this is quite a contentious study, in my opinion, because it was just so narrowly focused and set up autistic people to fail, I think, because, who can actually really tell what somebody is thinking or feeling just from the eyes. So I did the test myself. You can access it. I did a bit of a Google search, and New York Times magazine had actually set up the test. So I did it last night, and I scored 26 out of 36. So I didn't get all of them right. It's actually really, really tricky. And some of the words are quite abstract. So I can just highlight some of them for you. So there's target words. So the target word is panicked, and the students were given other words that they could choose from, which act as a distraction. And these words are jealous, arrogant, hateful. And I thought, if I was given a picture and given those words, I'd actually really struggle to see if someone is looking arrogant in their eyes.
Gosh, yes.
That's quite abstract. And yeah, I just wondered what you thought of that, actually.
Okay, well, I would completely struggle. I don't even know how you managed to get 26 out of 36. I mean, that's just mind-blowing in itself. But if we take the word arrogant, I suppose, thinking about it, I would need to, do you know what? I don't even know it would be the eyes for me. I think it would be bigger signs like the shoulders, or the way that the words they use, those would convey to me more that somebody was being arrogant or bragging about their skills or what they've achieved or what they've got. I wouldn't be able to look at the eyes and glean that information. So, gosh.
I know, and this. Oops, I've just had a reverberation. This has led me to delve a bit further into Simon Baron-Cohen and his reasons for setting up this study. And it turns out that he was trying to rule out the intellectual stuff, and he was trying to focus deliberately on empathy, and the link to this theory of mind with empathy. And quite a number of years ago, I thought about empathy long before I truly understood it, to be honest, because, it wasn't talked about the way it is now. I think we have, as a general population, we have so much more awareness of empathy, and it is a word used much more. And I got a book by Simon Baron-Cohen. It's called 0 Degrees of Empathy. And I found it really interesting. I love psychology stuff, because there is a spectrum of empathy, like with most things. And so those with 0 empathy are classed as those people that have probably committed evil crimes, because they show no remorse, and that is 0 empathy. So the psychopaths of this world are in that category. And he's clearly been himself, as an academic, interested in empathy. And he has learned in his study that autistic people have challenges with empathy. And I think this is why he devised the eyes, the reading of the eyes test, because, we can say when we watch a program, whether it's a documentary or a drama, as there are so many of them, of psychopaths, true crimes, for example, they have this morbid curiosity, well, they do for me, of, how can somebody be so lacking in empathy to commit such horrific crimes? And they have the dead eyes, or notoriously a stare, that they, a psychopath can just stare and penetrate somebody's eyes with their look, just their look. And so the book 0 Degrees of Empathy has these eyes on the cover, which is really interesting to me because they are like masks. And of course, as we now know really, really well, empathy is something that autistic people can have. It is a spectrum, you know, we have different degrees of it, and you don't have to be autistic to not have empathy. You know, psychopaths aren't autistic all the time. I mean, of course, there are probably 1 or 2 autistic psychopaths, but it doesn't mean that all autistic people are psychopaths. Far from it. And also there's much more recent understanding of the importance of facial expression and gesture because of COVID and us having to wear facial masks, and how that has really impacted our young people, especially in schools, in hearing and seeing their teachers properly if masks are, you know, covering part of the face, and it's taken away understanding of communication. I think it's been a real barrier. You know, a lot of the mask wearing people out there, obviously it's necessary for COVID, have a lot of people have struggled if they're autistic for that reason. And I just think it's an interesting coincidence that you know, this study was effectively looking at people's masks, you know, and we can mask, autistic people can mask metaphorically as well.
So thinking about COVID then, because obviously for me, I know that I, like many autistic people, do not have what's known as animated features in our facial expressions, unless it's really animated, like extremely happy or very sad. And I was also thinking about how often the masking pupils, and I don't mean wearing the mask, I mean the masking, are missed by so many professionals. But if everybody was wearing masks and you're totally dependent on the, you know, this I mean, it's like a pillar box, isn't it? It's that little bit you've got. How can we read well if we are not giving ourselves other clues? And obviously this was written in 2001, you're saying, isn't it? So this is quite an intriguing assertion, and you know, I can imagine that this would have been big gossip in the research world in 2001 because people won't have thought about it from this perspective. So, you know, is there more gossip that end, as it were, that you've noted?
Well, yes, I mean, there have been since lots of subsequent studies of the theory of mind, and lots of people have also denigrated this particular study as setting autistic people up to fail because it was so deficit based, and there were lots of assumptions made at the time of autistic people having so-called mind blindness, which in and of itself is quite a phrase, isn't it? To be mind blind.
Yeah. And what does that really mean?
This
mind
is it. I
blind.
mean,
what does that really mean?
I mean, it is something that I really struggle to get my head around myself, because I know so much about empathy and working out, you know, how we understand people, to really try and put ourselves in somebody else's shoes and to think about thinking. You know, I mean, it's taken a lot of my time thinking about thinking, metacognition, and there is this disconnect in the autistic brain between body and mind, which we know about. So many autistic advocates today talk about the disconnect, but it's not blindness. I mean, that I don't know, it is just such a contentious word, this blindness. And I have looked at other articles since, and this article, this paper by Baron Cohen was very focused and a very small number of children, and they have developed it, and other researchers, other academics have since developed it and looked at what they call behavioral abnormalities of autistic people. Again, this deficit type language being used, that in these studies they have normal people and autistic people, and so the control group is the normal person, the control, to try and see who can have that awareness of emotion and feeling and thought. And they have developed other tests. There was a Sally Ann test using a doll, where children are the focus, and they're told, that something happens to this doll, and there's another puppet, and they're using puppets. It's all a bit complicated, but if you Google Sally Ann test or just Sally Ann, I think it will come up. And there was also it's trying to get across this false belief, and there were stories created just for children to try and work out mentalizing traits in autistic people, such as, can autistic people understand when something is a lie? Can they understand when somebody is pretending to feel something when they're not? Can they understand a joke or a figure of speech? And this theory of mind umbrella covers all of that. That it isn't just about working out if someone is telling a lie. It's about recognizing when someone is manipulating you, which again is a very sensitive subject for lots of autistic people, because we can take people at face value. We can be very very honest and recognize unjust people, unjust actions, but also we can be easily gullible and take people on. And so it's an interesting area, this theory of mind. And there's also the link to seeing the big picture, or being detail orientated. That's another part of the theory of mind, in that lots of autistic people can have a detail focus. And so if they are focused on people, they might be better orientated to mentalizing. But then, of course, there are autistic people that really struggle with other people and socializing and social interaction, and not be easily comfortable in the company of other people, and strong emotional other people, having that energy around, and
also you. Lacking in a huge amount of confidence, isn't it? In have I read that person correctly? Have I understood their tone, for example? Because again, a lot of autistic people don't appreciate that they amplify. So say, for example, I had a client yesterday who said that when their parent raised their voice, they believed that they were being told off, and that the parent was angry. And when we broke it down, interestingly, it wasn't the eyes that they were focusing on. It was the tone and the volume. That was the only clue they had that really helped them get to the understanding it was anger. But when we broke it down again, we realized that actually it wasn't anger from the parent, it was frustration. And the frustration was around, I'm asking you to do something which is very difficult for somebody with PDA, and I digress with this, but the point being, it was really quite difficult to have the confidence to be sure that they've read the social cues correctly. And that is, I mean, it's rife amongst autistic people, isn't it? You're not always going to get it right. And just linking back to the gullible bit, again, I had another client where we've been working exploring friendships, relationships, and the difficulties encompassed around these, and not realizing that actually there was gaslighting going on. Again, it's not a very nice understanding, but if we are gullible because we haven't understood the cues, what chance have we got with just that?
Absolutely.
It's just not going to work, is it?
But also, to add on top of that, there are so many autistic people, young people, children that really struggle with eye contact.
Yeah.
And and it's one of the lookouts, isn't it, in the ADOS assessment, is how willing is the participant giving eye contact. And I know I forced myself through my childhood, through my teenage years, to engage with eye contact. It didn't come comfortably for me, and now I can do it, subconsciously all the time. I look at people all the time, and that's because of training. I've trained myself, I've made myself get over it. And when you're little, when you're vulnerable, eye contact can be extremely hard for a lot of autistic children, and so it is just such a contentious notion that somebody's mentalizing ability is able to be revealed in its entirety just by understanding what a person's eyes are telling you. I mean, this study, although it was done 20 years ago, has still been hailed and referred to often, especially the theory of mind stuff of autistic people not having a decent enough mentalizing ability, the deficit language, the mind-blindness, and that's stuck. It's stuck all these years, and it's still being referred to in certain parts of academia. And there are still, people outside of academia that don't truly, non-autistic people that don't truly acknowledge how far we've come since then in knowing the complexities of social interaction. That it's multifaceted. It's not natural to just hone in on somebody's eyes, whether you're autistic or not. You're taking in the entire person's body language. You're really listening to their tone, like you said with your client. Tone is a big factor in knowing how somebody's feeling. And if they've got an elevated tone, or if they, as women can sometimes go up a notch, can't we, with our pitch? When we're stressed, when we're anxious, we might, raise our voice, but also change our tone. Or if we're cross, we'll lower our tone. And so, there's all these different factors, and subsequent researchers have looked at different ways of proving this lack of theory of mind in autistic people, from using stories, from using triangles that are animated. I mean, get this, just a triangle interacting on a screen in an animated fashion with another triangle, to represent if they're dancing, or what was one of the words? Coaxing. So triangles coaxing each other. I mean, coaxing, that's quite an abstract thing for a child, isn't it?
That is so abstract.
Are you being coaxed? And that is the thing about gullibility, isn't it? That, there are people out there who will coax, who will try and persuade you. It can be completely innocent, of course. You've got two friends playing together and one friend is trying to persuade the other, coax the other, come on, let's go and do this, whatever it is. And it is only something that a person can get to know through experience. And if we've got a slightly one-sided experience, perhaps with our parents, because, when we're little people, our parents are our main interactive body. It's utterly reliant on those interactions. And a non-autistic child will have a good understanding of what their parent is thinking or feeling by the age of 5. The brain is such a sponge at a young age, as we know. And if there's been enough interaction between parent and child, that there's a good understanding there of your parent, and parents have particular styles. Some are authoritative, some are more persuasive, some are gentle and really passive. So it very much depends on parenting style, as well as to how your little person responds to you, and how to react to you. And sadly, those children that have scary parents, that all they hear and see and know is something that's very, very frightening. So they know fear very well, and they know what anger looks like very well. But do they know play? Do they know a playful tone? Come on, let's, encouraging tone. Do they know joyous, excitable tones and faces? When somebody is stressed, it's really, really hard, isn't it, to pretend not to be. So yes, it is.
So that just kind of reiterated to me, as I'm thinking along with what you're saying, of anxiety, but also the fact that we have a much shorter dictionary or choice of words that we would associate with labels of emotions. And the thing that you started out with this piece of research was this was the high end of autism, high functioning autism. Now, we don't generally use those phrases anymore, do we? But, given that this was only 20 years ago and things move very, very slowly, it's, I suppose, quite disappointing that we don't give autistic people more credit for what they can do. And I suppose this goes back to the fact that you were saying it's quite deficit language, isn't it? It's very, frankly, quite depressing, isn't it? You're deemed quite stupid, really, in some respects, of not having the volume of language, not being able to associate with different styles of emotions or behavior from others. That to me is quite limiting, but also quite derogatory. I mean, where does that feed us with the confidence to try? Where does that feed us the confidence to give it a go? Because all that reiterates this to me is no wonder I was so anxious as a child, because, if I couldn't even convey in a way how I felt because I didn't recognize my emotions and I didn't recognize somebody else's emotions, it's just easier to just stay shum, not do anything. But then, when you think about the jokes, I mean, it's renowned that autistic people are a bit delayed in understanding the joke, or they just simply don't get it. And I was absolutely classic with that. But again, is that is that because we don't convey it in a way that we all get it? It's not a fair playing field for a kickoff, is it? Pardon the pun.
Exactly. I mean, we all have our own sense of humour and our own things that tickle us, that amuse us. I mean, what amuses my son doesn't amuse me, and this is a common conversation that we have with my youngest and I, that he just doesn't get it when I don't find something funny that he thinks is hilarious. It is so personal, but also it's about how we display our affection and our love as well. And we very much feel love and affection for our family, for our parents, for our children, but we won't necessarily demonstrate that in obvious ways. I mean, I know when my boy was little, he didn't like hugs and cuddles. He didn't like to be sort of cosseted and held. And he didn't like kisses. And we used to just do nose rubs. And still now he's a teenager and obviously less likely to want hugs and cuddles and kisses. But, he does. But on his terms, it's when he's ready. But even now, we just do like sometimes cheek to cheek instead of a kiss. It's still a display of affection. It's just a bit different. It's not as obvious. And does that make him lacking in mentalizing ability? No. I think he has learned over the years that, mum's upset because she's doing this or saying that, or, I'm displaying a certain type of behavior. And like say, if I'm stressed, and he will respond to that perfectly well by just saying, it's okay, mum, and being near me and having that proximity and coming towards me and perhaps putting an arm around my shoulder. He's learned, oh, mum's distressed, I'm going to put my arm around her shoulder and say, it's okay, mum. And that doesn't mean he's lacking in empathy. That's quite the opposite. And yet, there have been times when somebody else, other than me, has perhaps been upset or angry with him, and he's really, really struggled with it, mainly peers, at school. He's like said to me, oh, this happened and they really got angry at me and I don't know what I did wrong. And so, I've helped him sort of reflect and think, okay, what happened? Perhaps it was something you said. Perhaps it was the way you said it. Because he can be quite blunt and cutting. And I think, that is another factor as well that we're very familiar with is, we can be quite brutal in our directness. And sometimes it can come across as rude, that we are so direct that, there's no messing about. And again, that doesn't mean that that's detrimental, that that's a deficit of understanding. It's just a different way of being. It's the deficit language really got to me in this journal. And I admitted to you, it took a few attempts for me to read it, to be honest, because it uses words like abnormality. The autistic people have social abnormalities, and it's just not hard to understand why that's difficult to hear and difficult to read, because it isn't an abnormality, in my opinion. It's a difference. It's a different perception.
I mean, again, it's interesting with 2001, isn't it? Because what we know now, 20 years down the line, is that actually there is a considerably higher volume of figures suggesting they are autistic. And on the Facebook group, we had an advert earlier last week of the numbers that have increased over, I think it was from 1975 onwards. In 2001, clearly Simon Baron-Cohen was like, you know what, it's not many people. They are the minority, and therefore there is the abnormalities. What we know now, of course, is a very different story. It's more common than we would like to perhaps understand, but there is a definite growing network of parents, and in some cases, professionals who invariably are parents of autistic children going, hang on a minute, we need to do something more about this, because this information, although it is in some respects outdated, is autism, an abnormality? How can it possibly be an abnormality if there is now a growing number of recognized statistics of people being diagnosed with autism, but also so many parents, of our age, and even grandparents beginning to recognize that they are showing similar traits? There is that understanding that it can't possibly be abnormalities, can it? Or does that where we were talking yesterday, I think we were talking about, I really strongly resent now having to be referred as autism as being ASD, a disorder. Or we have ASC, a condition. Well, hang on a minute. I really liked the idea of just being autistic syndrome. But even then, I'm beginning to think, really? Because I'm aware these days that I now just put in my reports autism or autistic, rather than adding, like you say, this deficit word of disorder, condition, syndrome. And if I'm feeling it, and trying to put it in my reports, it's clearly there is something that you and I are slowly but surely uncovering, unpicking through all this research in and around autism and mental health, that's saying that maybe we need to start changing our language, rather than allowing researchers to just insist that, oh, well, no, it's this is what we need to do. So what else have you uncovered? Because I'm fascinated now. What else have you uncovered?
Well, I looked up an article recently written by Laura de Thorne. She's a PhD student, and this highlighted that it's not that autistic people lack empathy, but rather it's about different neurotypes experiencing the world in an alternative way. So therefore, it's creating this this world of difference as opposed to it being a disorder, and that it's about the meeting of alternative minds.
Nice.
That there's one person over here who's non-autistic and a person over here who is autistic, and so they have very different viewpoints, very different experiences in the world. And perhaps it's not a lacking of empathy, it's just a different view of that person, that they can't quite understand. And time and time again in my research, I've realized that there are still, sadly, so many misunderstandings out there in academia, that autism is it's a fact of life, and yes, it is much more prevalent than we could ever have imagined. And so we need to just simply find a way of the two communities coexisting with equality. Why should autistic people be marginalized and be treated differently really, if society is equal and is open and is aware. How many of these autistic advocates that we've got now very loudly shouting on social media rooftops about, just get with the program, that we're not really a minority, we're amongst you everywhere,
everywhere.
every classroom, literally every classroom in the country will have at least one autistic person. Certainly somebody with dyslexia, certainly somebody with ADHD, they're there. Why is it still news? Really? It's just like, okay, let's just accept. And of course, our learning environment is absolutely key. And it's not just school, it's home as well. And the sooner we accept that our young people have different perceptions, that, they won't see it the way you do, whether you're, both autistic or not, that, your children, their siblings to one another, that they're going to be very different in their perceptions. Those autistic people who cannot verbalize their feelings, perhaps, they are non-speaking and rely heavily on their gestures and on their devices to communicate. Do they not have a voice worthy of being listened to? And some of them are writing books. I mean, there's that famous one that's been made into a film, The Reason Why I Jump.
Oh yeah.
The Japanese boy, who was 13 when he wrote it, and it's been recently been made into a film. And he said how he would have to leave a room because he was over empathizing and over sympathetic to the energy in a room, and that he would have to retract himself, because he just couldn't cope with heightened emotions and needed solitude. And so, again, that's applicable to a lot of autistic people, that they need to recharge in solitude because people's emotions are too much. They're hard to bear. You change the banner.
Yes, I have.
I'm moving on.
Moving on, yeah.
We're running out of time. So this was a word that I introduced to you, and you did. You said, "Oh, how do I spell that? How do I say that?" I think it's Alexithymia, and this was something that I learned about after reading an article, and it really resonated with me because Alexithymia is basically not having the words for emotions, not probably truly understanding emotions, felt emotions, and certainly not being able to recognize emotions in another person. So clearly there's a strong link here with empathy. And there's a startling statistic that 50% of the autistic population have alexithymia, and 1 in 10 in neurotypical population. So it's pretty common, and it is definitely something that needs to be brought more into the conversation, I think, because it's fundamental to know what it is you're feeling for your well-being, and if you have interoceptive challenges, like a lot of autistic people do, then it can be extremely hard to recognize what it is you're feeling. And interoception, I don't know if this is something as familiar either as an alexithymia. It is effectively the eighth sense. It is the feeling in the body, and it can be pain sensations, to what extent you have a pain threshold or not. Perhaps you're oversensitive to pain. It can be the notion of elevated heart rate, noticing that your heart is beating faster. This has been proven to be absent in someone who is alexithymic, in that they've done a study where they rigged up heart monitors and got them to perhaps exercise and elevate their heart rate, and then to be able to count their heart rate or notice their heart rate. That those with alexithymia really struggle with that. And equally, someone who's alexithymic might struggle in knowing when to go to the toilet. I mean, this is, a basic bodily function. So it can be interesting if your child says, or perhaps they don't say, perhaps they have an accident, and this accident has happened at school, and your response as mom would be, why didn't you say you wanted to go to the toilet, sweetheart? I didn't know, because perhaps they've held on so long that, the floodgates open, because they haven't actually recognized that feeling of full bladder.
I was thinking as well, there's a lot of, when I'm doing assessments, there's a lot of parents who relay that their children need prompting with fluids because they don't recognize when they're thirsty. And also they need prompting with food, or the other way around, where they need encouragement to stop eating because they don't know when they're feeling full.
Yeah.
So, gosh.
Yeah, the studies in alexithymia have been interesting, and very, very strong correlation with interoception difficulties. In terms of the actual emotions, of course, we as in the world of therapy, for example, we're told all the time, where if you're feeling sad, for example, where might you feel that in your body? It's about tuning into your body with this whole mindful movement of latter years and yoga and yoga nidra. Where in your body are you feeling tension, and let that tension go. And if you're feeling pain, notice where that pain is. Or if you're feeling content and calm, where would you feel that in your body? How would you recognize that you're feeling calm and at ease? And so it's about putting words, using the language to explain that. And that can be really, really difficult for people. And are you still there? Have you pressed a button? Okay, I'll carry on. And this can be really, really challenging if you struggle to sense where you're feeling things in your body. And perhaps having an increased awareness can be quite a challenge for our autistic people, that they just don't know what it is they're feeling and what that might represent and what that might mean. If somebody is really, really stressed and anxious, there's probability that their heart rate is elevated, that perhaps they're hyperventilating and struggling to breathe. Perhaps before breakfast happens and school is on the cards, perhaps they're feeling butterflies in their tummy. We talk a lot about that sort of rising anxiety or nervousness being like butterflies in the tummy. And to someone who is alexithymic, they just won't get that. That won't hit their radar at all. So it is about, as parents, creating that space for using language and identifying language. I mean, I found this really interesting for myself, because I only realized a couple of years ago that I actually struggled with this. That, you know, I would really struggle, for example, with interviews. Interviews for jobs were just excruciating for me, and any sort of public speaking, even though ironically I was a teacher, but for some reason it was different because I was in front of children, so that was okay. But certainly interviews with peers, you know, I would fall apart and not recognize it. And I would literally have puddles of sweat under my armpits. I'd be saturated with sweat. I would be so tense, you know, I'm fidgeting and twitching, and, you know, the foot's up and down, bouncing repeatedly, or I might be fiddling with my hands and picking at my nails. Because, you know, I do identify now with the ADHD. And so clearly, you know, I'm showing all these physical signs of anxiety and nervousness. And at one point in an interview, one of the people interviewing me said, "Would you like a break? Do you want to get a glass of water or something?" Because I was clearly really struggling. And, you know, and I was like, "No, I just want to get this over with." No, it's fine. And afterwards I realized that, you know, I was just a wreck. and they saw that, and this person who said that during the interview, she came out after me and she's like, "Are you okay?" I said, "Oh, that's very kind of you. Yes, I'm okay. I just get really, really anxious in interviews." So yes, it is about encouraging our children to recognize these things, to notice. You know, perhaps you're feeling a little bit worried because I can see that you're fidgeting, or, you know, perhaps they're not looking at you as much, you know, perhaps they're at their heads down, and so they're feeling quite anxious or sad. Yeah, it's making it really explicit, I think. And the more we talk about emotions, the better, you know, increasing that emotional language, certainly, because we've got the core emotions, which hopefully most of us can recognize, you know, the sadness, the anger, the disgust, you know, the really strong core emotions. But then there are very nuanced emotions as well.
Which brings us nicely onto our last bit, doesn't it? Dr. Damien Milton, yes, double empathy. Now, you said that this guy is local to the UK, but I can see that obviously he networks. Again, he's an academic, is he not?
He is an academic at the University of Kent, and he came up with this theory, which is being strongly recognised and followed and supported by the autistic community, certainly the academic autistic community.
And he's recognised as being autistic as well.
Yes, he identifies as autistic.
Tremendous news.
He's got an autistic child, I think, maybe more than one. I'm trying to remember now. But yes, he's set up PARC, which is the Participatory Autism Research Collective.
Right.
So there are now a good core group of autistic academics out there working incredibly hard to make voices heard in academia, because it is a hard nut to crack, and hopefully this research, this valuable research, is going to be disseminated and widely taken up, certainly in education. Well, it should be in education and the medical profession, because you know, it's all about the diversity and embracing the diversity, but also accepting that there are autistic people in the world, and there are non-autistic people in the world, and therefore they have very different perspectives and experience to bring. And if you have an interview situation, for example, where the autistic person is the interviewee and the non-autistic person is the interviewer, then it might be incredibly challenging for a mutual understanding to be achieved of empathy, because we have such opposing views of it and experiences of it, and that is the problem, not the autistic person not feeling empathy. Far from it. It's about the non-autistic person not recognizing that, and having a meaningful interaction on the same page, because we're on different pages.
So why then the phrase double empathy? What's that about? Because obviously we spoke earlier, didn't you, about there are some not very nice people who clearly don't have an ounce of empathy, and yet this suggests to me that somebody is kind of overloaded with lots of empathy. I think you said earlier about Desmond Tutu.
Yeah, I mean, at the opposite end of the scale in the book is to the psychopath, to the zero empathy, is the super empathetic person. Desmond Tutu is mentioned in this book by Byron Cohen as probably, and sadly, obviously, he passed away recently, being somebody who had oodles of empathy to the extent that it was his life work to help others. And this is, again, something that we in the autistic community know of, that there's lots of autistic people out there who devote themselves to the cause, to helping autism be better understood, and really work towards that big goal of acceptance and understanding. And so we can say that it is a double empathy issue, in that it's not about a deficit of mindfulness or mentalizing. It is in fact just a difference, and perhaps we need to just recognize that more explicitly. And so if there is a situation perhaps where you're in a business meeting or you're in a school meeting, and the other person just doesn't seem to be understanding your what you're saying, that you call this out, and you could say, I think this is a double empathy issue here, because you're clearly not understanding what I'm saying, and I clearly don't understand your perspective and what you're saying, because I'm autistic, or because you're not autistic. And just calling it out and being, like I'm saying, really explicit with that.
Interesting. Very interesting. And I suspect, empathy needs to be another session on its own, doesn't it? Another program on its own, because it's such a big topic of debate, isn't it? So we should consider that. Thank you, Sue. You've been amazing as ever. Any final sort of notes or points of interest that you think we should leave our listeners with from today's session? Is there anything you kind of want to just reiterate?
Yeah, that despite the deficit language that is still clearly out there and being used, sadly, certainly in the medical and educational world, to try and rise above it. I know it's not an easy thing to do, but that's something that I've worked really hard on for myself, is that, to find an alternative word for it, and to sing about it, you know, to bring it out into the open and say, you know, this is not about deficit. That, you know, my child does have feelings, does have emotions, and you know, please be kind and considerate and compassionate about that. It's always about spreading the kindness. Spread the kindness in order to further understanding.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nicely put. Nicely put. Okay, that's a wrap up for yet again another really interesting episode. My thanks to Sue, as ever. You've been a star. Do come and join us next week. We have absolutely no idea what we're going to be talking about next week, but you will soon know, because invariably we will have a discussion following this, kind of think about what we would like to explore with you next week. You can find us on YouTube, you can find us on the Facebook community group, but by all means, certainly do give a listen to this, because of course it's fascinating information in and around mental health and autism. Thank you, and we'll see you again next Wednesday at 12:15. Bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye.